My name is Claddy and I do have a lot of makeup. I mean to do a video today and I think it belongs to my intentional makeup series. I have this idea. I want to look into my makeup collections and just see, it's already there. I just want to look into it, take a peep into it, and just want to learn what you already have here. And intentionally, I want to figure out what am I lacking, what already have, and especially what already have multiple items of that categories. So maybe a specific color blush, a specific texture of a lip gloss, or a lip oil because I love lip oil. I tend to accumulate a lot of lip oils, or a color story of an eyeshadow palette that I have repetitively. It might come in handy the next time I decide I want to purchase this product. It's good to know that I have a repertoire of a bunch of items, a bunch of beautiful makeup that I currently have. I don't need a duplicate, maybe a subpar versions of that already beautiful item in my collections. So let's kick off with this idea. I think my favorite color story, no, I think my favorite type, category of eyeshadow palettes is neutral eyeshadow palettes. I love myself a neutral color story because that's what I wear. That's what I can easily incorporate into my day-to-day look. And I think it's simple enough for me because I don't do artistic, graphic, what's this word? Editorial? Yes, that's the word. Editorial Instagram looks. So I want an easy to use color story, and it happens to be a bunch of rosy, mauvy, brown shades. So I want to share with you my 6 favorite eyeshadow palettes, but they all have neutral color story, but they are not the same. I love them for different reasons, and this video is all about color stories, about the color, the tone of an eyeshadow palette that makes it neutral but special enough for me to have right here with me 6 different varieties of neutral eyeshadows. And I think it would be fun because now that I have all of them in front of me and actually have to pick them from my collections of like roughly 40-ish eyeshadow palettes, I have to pick just one eyeshadow palette with this color story just to tell you how special that item to me. So first of all, let's talk about the most neutral eyeshadow palette. So to me, this palette is an epitome of a neutral eyeshadow palette. Every time you think of the word neutral and you think of an eyeshadow palette, I want you to imagine that color story. And to me, this is Etude House HERSEY'S Creamy Chocolate Play Color Eyes Mini. So it's only a 6-pan eyeshadow palette, but do you see how brown and neutral it is? So it doesn't have that grayish tone, it doesn't have that mauve tone, it doesn't have like a burnt orange. It's just a bunch of brown shades, and they all have that mirror level in terms of a balance between warm and cool, and it has a balanced amount of shimmers and mattes as well. So when we think of like a neutral eyeshadow palette, we tend to think of browns because browns can be used as transition shade, as blending shade. A lighter brown can be used as an inner corner brightening shade. This palette has it all. And it's not a full matte palette. It's not a utility palette. This is a full palette that you can use to create a full look. You have one very sparkly, a bit gritty, a bit glittery shade, but I think this is one of the best glittery formulas of a shimmer eyeshadow that I have. And you have like a more metallic deeper brown. So this palette, the color story and the texture, everything is very cohesive. It's just one of my favorite neutral eyeshadow palette to begin with. Let's talk about a palette with a warm neutral color story. So we are still in the zone of a brown eyeshadow palette. Once again, these are just my visions of what color theory represent itself to me, what I say. So warm tone neutral palette to you might be different, but to me is this palette right here from Mash Cosmetics. The warm tone here doesn't come from orange, it comes from yellow, which I find cool and interesting, but wearable enough to me. In a way, I don't like orange as a warm color that you mix in with brown. I want some tones like this. This is like a kind of greenish, yellowish, leaning a bit khaki brown. Looks really nice on the skin because tweak it too far, you might make it turn into like a bright, shimmering orange. But then you have these colors, so these two, like super neutral, but you have like maybe three of these shades, like warm tone, but it has this brick red quality in it. I like the tone in this palette and I like the formulations as well, but like I said, this video we're gonna talk about color story. So I like the directions that they took with this palette. You don't need orange. Like I don't really want warm orange on my eyes. Every time I try to blend a brown out, if they use orange as a base color of a brown eyeshadow, it would look orange. It will have this like hint of warm orange in the end, and I don't want it. I'd rather have like a kind of a muddy kind of color like this, but it's still warming up. So I think this is the kind of warm tones that I like. And yeah, I think this palette is so unique in terms of color story to my collections. I've rarely seen warm tone palette to be done like this before. On the other hand, we have a cool tone neutral eyeshadow palette. This is BH Cosmetics Midnight City. This is an old and long gone eyeshadow palette. I believe they discontinued this way before they rebranded their brand and then they went out of business. I mean, they were bought out, but nothing has happened with the brand BH Cosmetics, but this palette is quite old already. But it has been a staple cool tone neutral eyeshadow palette in my collections. They have this like grayish brown shade and they have a bunch of like silver metallic shades. I adore this purple shimmering shade. Like it's so grayish, but in a way it has this silver reflect to it that I feel so wearable. I don't know why. And it has a bunch of like lighter shades. I think they do the lighter shades very well in this palette, and the fact it has a mixture between neutral, cool tone and warm tone, I think this color story is excellent. And some people, I think they work between orange and blue really nicely against the contrast of those two shades. I'm not that one, but I really appreciate that if you have a color story like this, you can work with orange and blue. And now it just sounds like Frosted Flakes, the cereal brand. I remember Glam Light did a collaborations with that brand, and I remember the palette has orange and blue together. But I think I have been using this palette for years and it's kind of a cool tone neutral workhorse in my collections. Like I've been using it if I want like grayish brown, or I want like a silver. I want like a true silver doesn't have any like yellow shimmerings in it. I would go for this palette, and I don't know how I can declutter it regardless of how old it is. We are gonna talk about my favorite neutral color story, which is Rosy and Mauvy. neutral. I'm not sure between rosy and mauvy which one is my favorite, but I'm gonna show you two palettes. This one is a rosy neutral color stories from the brand Peripera. I have, what is it? I believe they have like a name for the palette, like technology tech. Anyway, this is palette number 2, Cherry Cherry Cherry. This is a beautiful, beautiful color story. I'm not talking about the formula. The formula is, it has some questions in it, but I love the undertone, like the pink, but neutral. When I say rosy, I don't want warm pink. This is the neutral, coolish pink. Not gonna say it's cool tone pink because then it would turn into that like dusky rose, but you can tell like these two and this one in the middle, it has enough warm in it just to make it at the right level of neutral and rosy. I hope it makes sense. And they have, I guess, this lighter peach, which is like a warmer shade. This one is a bit warmer, but I think this palette, because of the low saturations of the color story, it does seems to be quite neutral, like quite in the middle. So I think this palette, regardless of the formulations, I think the color story is done very well. And debatably, this could be my favorite tone to wear because it's just so easy to use. And because I believe it looks good on me, I can just like put either of these two matte shades, and then I feel like my look every time is pulled together because the underlying base color has such a beautiful and flattering tones. It's already laid out on my skin, and I just have to like build up another color on top just to make it a little bit sophisticated. But every time I use the mattes in this palette, I feel like that's the tone that I want. Next palette, this is a mauvey neutral color story. Last night I googled mauve. They said it's a pale purple, so I guess any purple that's paler than a full pigment purple can be considered a mauve, even with a color story like this. This is my favorite palette. This is, I don't know up to say is it still my favorite color story. I think it could be a bit too deep for me at the moment, but I love the undertone. So you have a wide range of purple, you have like cool tone purple, but mostly you have this kind of like paler purple with a warmth and neutral undertone. So I guess these two mattes a bit warmer, but like these shimmers, they're leaning a bit cooler. So it has this saturation to it. It has this grayish quality that make it a bit deep. Some of it even lean a bit blue, but probably like they seem to look a bit lighter than you see when they are all together. So I like the rosy neutral palette because the undertone is very pink. The undertone in this palette is very purple, but it's still neutral, it's still light. It has this hint of brown, and actually if you blend some of the shades in this palette out, you can get that purpley brown shade. It has this subtlety that eventually will give you this neutrality. Neutrality, not just like, oh, there's a bunch of brown in it. It's gonna pull very brown and you don't see any purple at all. I think the mauvey is still my favorite part in this palette, mixing with a bit of a brown. And still, I think when I pull it out, I know that it's still one of my favorite palettes of all time. I want to show you my colorful neutral palette. This is Blend Bunny, the Dollhouse palette. This palette is very heavy. Every time I try to like hold it up in front of the camera, like my arms get really tired. I call it a colorful neutral palette because they have a bunch of colors. They have a selections of digital color of the visible color spectrum. What's it called? Visible light spectrum. Anyway, you have purple, you have pink, you have green, you have orange, you have blue, I assume, but then they add a bunch of brown, like they make it brownish. That's why, look at this palette, I feel like I have a bunch of brown shades. At the same time, I have a bunch of rainbow-ish colors, and it's just so fun to play with it. Like, ooh, I want to do pinkish, but I want to do with a bit of brown. I want to do a purplish look, but then I can mix it with a bit of brown. I can even go to the orange territory, but then I still have a brown that is coordinated with that orange. So everything is so cohesive and it's colorful in a neutral and usable way. So it's so user friendly, even you can play with color. That's how easy to use, a palette could be. And you have a lighter shade, a mid-tone shade, and a deeper shade. It's like, it's not just neutral, it's an expansion of the word neutral palette, because now not just the color, you can adjust the intensity of the color. Sometimes I think it's so cost effective when I purchase this palette. It feels like you have too much in this palette. And you have these like jewel tone shimmers, and then you have like lighter shimmers. But like we're talking about neutral color story, so I think I did mainly just focus on the matte. And that's this. That's my sixth favorite neutral eyeshadow palette, and it's important to me to know what I have because I want to narrow down what's the essence of my collections, what is the core functions of my makeup collections. I don't want to add more products. I don't want to add more neutral palettes in my collections, not knowing what functions it's gonna give me. I have a background in engineering, so every time I think of my makeup collections, at the back of my mind, I'm thinking of how to use it more efficiently, and I want to do this kind of video more often, just to let myself know. Like, I want to give myself a mental note on what is in my collections that I enjoy using from time to time and what I can make the most use out of them. And I think neutral eyeshadow palette is a good start. Once again, I'm Cloudy, and hopefully we see each other again. Bye!